Vermont, as well as Stronghold Property Management. I'm also the CEO of Keller Williams. Angela, who I consider a phenomenal value to anybody who's investing in real estate, is a great resource for us for the Vermont Apartment Landlord Owners Association. And we're just so delighted to have people here today and talk about one of my favorite topics, multifamily and investment properties. And wow, between the legislative, between the tenant landlord environment and
you gotta hit that, got it. I think
the market, I think we're gonna have a very interesting updates today for you guys. And please be interactive, ask questions, challenge our perspectives.
Absolutely. And so I think Brian and I are put together, if I can get my stuff to work, and if it won't, we'll just, we'll manage.
Interrupt for a second, water. Those in person, we'll get lunch. One's gonna be online, but it's on the way. Man, how are you?
Okay, so we have our agenda. We're prepared today. Amazing. I'm going to do a little talking about legislative updates for folks because it's going to be a rough year. It's going to be a long year. And so I want to kind of give people a little bit of a preview of what I'm seeing. Then Brian's going to talk about some market trends. And if we have time, we're going to talk about termination notices again. My favorite topic these days, and I will get into more of why that is if we make it to that slide. So let's start with what we're seeing in the legislature. We're about 2 weeks in. I've already seen more housing bills introduced in the last 2 weeks than I think I've been doing this a long time. So it's, all I can say is hold on to your hats, maybe hold on to your pocketbooks, hold on to something, because it's going to be a ride. So the thing to keep in mind though is just because a bill's been introduced doesn't mean anything's going to happen with it. It's all kinds of bills that get introduced every year. Many of them just do what we call stay up on the wall in committee. No testimonies are taken. Nothing ever happens with them. So part of what I do and part of what the lobbyist that the association employs does is figures out which ones are actually going to move forward and which ones we have to be worried about, which ones we think are going to get some traction. So currently what the legislature is working on is what they call the budget adjustment bill. So this is when they come back in session, they're doing any sort of financial adjustments from the budget that they passed that started in July. And so sometimes receipts are up, so the state has more money. Sometimes programs haven't used as much. So they're looking at where they could reallocate money to. Why am I bringing this up as it relates to housing? Well, what happened last year is the legislature passed a giant housing bill. So S100, I think it was called the Home Act, if folks were familiar with that. But in the Home Act, there were these 3 programs that the legislature created. One was the rental assistance program. So this was another round of back rent assistance for landlords and tenants. There was this tenant representation pilot that was in there, and also this rental housing stabilization service program that was created. So these programs were created and then not funded in the budget. So one of the things that the legislature is currently looking at is there money that they can pull during this budget adjustment process to fund some of these programs. I testified at the end of last week about these bills. From my perspective, the really important one is this rental assistance program. I think if we've seen anything, there's a need for rental assistance still. We can go into the politics of whether paying people rent for 18 months was a good idea or not. But in the end, even before COVID, we knew that if people had access to some rental assistance, they could dig themselves out of a hole and not get evicted. The only program that's available right now is what is called HOP grants. Some of you are familiar with that probably through CVOEO. They only pay for 3 months of back rent and then require that the landlord and tenant come up with a payment plan. This rental assistance program would be like the early rental assistance program in COVID, where it will pay all of the back rent, basically make the tenant whole, pay legal fees if there's an eviction pending, make the landlord whole. and allow the tenant to sort of have a clean slate moving forward. It works like the HOP program in that the tenant has to show they can actually afford that unit going forward. So the program isn't gonna pay just to have somebody then fall behind again the next month. So it's sort of, again, balancing of interest. So we're watching this right now to see what's gonna happen, if money's gonna get allocated for these programs or not. So stay tuned. It could be a good thing. It could just be like, here we are again. So what have we seen happen in the house? And feel free to ask questions. Don't wait till Q&A at the end, like it's way more fun. Yes, Cole, I knew if somebody would have a question.
I didn't want to interrupt,
Nope.
but if you're opening it up, are they taking into account with allocating to that program, the backlog of evictions?
So I think
As a bit like alleviate?
kind of, maybe not really. I mean, the backlog of evictions is kind of a misnomer. So eviction cases are taking longer to get through the system, but we're not seeing sort of a true backlog. Like criminal court right now, they have thousands and thousands and thousands of cases that have been pending for 5 or more years. So they have a true backlog over there. The civil court has done a pretty good job of like getting older cases taken care of, getting things back on track. Jury trials are happening again in most counties. That was where the huge backlog is. It's just slower through the system. So I'm not seeing a true backlog in civil court. I'm just seeing a longer process.
Okay.
So, but we've collected a lot of data about people that occasionally needing some assistance. Like a lot of the renter population lives paycheck to paycheck or income check to income check. And so a car repair or missing some work or, you know, having some sort of, I don't know, childcare crisis, you know, where they're out or their hours are cut, they're on the edge. So any of those things happen and then they just spiral into a hole that they can't get themselves out of. There's exceptions to that. I see those exceptions every day, but a huge number of problems can be solved, particularly with that affordability component. So the tenant has to show, yes, normally I can afford this unit. So it's just this one little hiccup thing that happened and I need some help.
And when you're saying that it's not currently funded, does that mean the program is not functioning right now?
No, they have no money. So again, this happens in the legislature.
Yeah.
Create programs and then it gets cut out of the budget. So if there's no money, it doesn't exist. I understand from Vermont State Housing Authority, who's the entity that would be running the program, if they get funding, they can stand it up almost immediately. So. All right, so what are we seeing over in the house? That's where all the fun ones are. So the first one that recently got introduced is H616. So this is a bill that would impose a temporary moratorium on no-cause evictions. So I
How do you
know,
have no temporary hold when there's no cause?
right,
So how do you evict?
for cause, non-payment around or breach of lease. So it would put a hold on that type of notice for 1 year. Did everybody pick out the handouts when they came in, the little one pager that was back there? I have that one listed at the end. I probably should have listed it at the front. This is what's called a short form bill. And basically it's just a giant preamble. It was introduced by the chair of the House General and Housing Committee. And I think this is a roadmap for what the legislature's priorities are going to be this year as it relates to housing. So that short form bill has things on there like just cause eviction, rent control, rental assistance, repair assistance. So they tried to throw some things in there that, you know, would appeal while also having these other ones. Yes, Brian.
Are there any key players that you think any member of our Zoom audience or in-person audience should advocate specifically to? this matters.
We'll get to that.
Awesome, thank you.
Yeah.
And what is their rationale behind this? I mean, I see a lot of,
Yep.
pandemic and stuff in here, and we're how many years past?
People got really comfortable with the amount of money that was going into Vermont and got real comfortable with the amount of assistance that was there for tenants. And so instead of fixing the other problems, which are people don't get paid enough money and it's really expensive to live there, and we don't have enough housing because we haven't promoted development and we've encouraged underdevelopment for decades. So instead of focusing on those, we're gonna talk about how landlords are terrible. Cause that gets more traction. And it feels better to help tenants.
Or the dark side.
We are the dark side.
Hey, Bill, you ought to call me if acknowledge me if I ask you. The other thing I would encourage, if anybody's taking time to advocate to the legislature. I find that a lot of people that I talk to in other states, like Florida, I heard you can evict somebody in under 30 days.
Yeah.
So in that state, I would argue the lack of cause makes a lot more sense.
Right.
So I think what happens is when advocates for just cause compare to other states and say, well, this state's doing it, that state's doing it. They don't point out that that state has a process, you can get a non-paying resident out in 30 days or less.
Right.
So that's my own personal 2 cents, is it's part of the issues, they don't appreciate the context.
It's the process in Vermont is entirely different, right? Places that have just cause right now, San Francisco, Portland, Seattle, New Jersey does, like all of those places have a much different eviction process, much shorter, very quick, very truncated. It does not look like the process here in Vermont, and that is one of the disconnects in this conversation. All right, we have my favorite, not my favorite. All of these are my favorites. H617. So this is a bill that would clarify that landlords cannot charge applicants for a credit check fee or a background check fee. So it would modify the no application fee statute to make it clear that you can't charge for these other things. This is legal aid's new shtick. We have always read the application statute as you can't charge an application fee. But that didn't mean you couldn't collect money for a credit check, you couldn't collect money for a background check. Well, coming out of COVID, tenants were having a hard time finding places to go. And so legal aid has reinterpreted that application fee statute to say, oh, well, that means credit check fees and background check fees. And we said, no, it didn't. So they've gone to the legislature to say, make it say what we want it to say.
So now we have to pay that $50 for 100 applicants.
Well, if this bill passes, right? So we're talking about things that are in the works.
Yeah.
So things for all of you to be thinking about. This one, 617. What do we hear a lot about housing? Rents are so high. Why do rents keep going up? Why does it cost so much to rent here? Every time you pass a fee like this onto the landlord, it gets factored into the rent. It's another cost of doing business, which means rents continue to creep up. H684. This is not the sort of white elephant bad bill. This would create a statewide rental housing registry. It is the exact same bill that the legislature passed like a year and a half ago and that the governor vetoed. It is probably one of the most balanced rental registry bills I have ever seen come out of the legislature. Meaning that all it is creating a database of where rental properties are and who owns them for state government. It excludes it from FOIA requests from the public. So there's no way like legal aid could request that information. I couldn't request that information as to who owns rental properties around the state of Vermont. It would be for state agencies to use for housing needs assessments and planning purposes only. And also to have a way to communicate with landlords when there's emergencies, when there's new programs that come out, when new rental assistance programs thing, or if there's, some new change in the law that they need to let folks know about. Yes.
We already have that.
If you have properties in a municipality that already has a rental registry, you would be excluded from registering at the state level because those municipalities would provide that information to the state.
Like the landlord certificates, for example. They've already got to do this.
Right.
Why are they gonna charge, they're gonna charge somebody for this, so. why?
Because the tax department won't share their data.
Well, I'll say it again.
But yes, they do have it at the tax department level.
Yeah, they should share, it should not be part with.
So there's that. But you know, there is a fee associated with this bill of $35, which is why the governor vetoed it. So I don't know if there's gonna be a look to see if they can figure out how to fund this without having to ask for fees, but I don't see it because you need money to run programs, so. Yep. Yep. All right, and then this 829, which is the one-page handout, which gives you sort of the little roadmap of where I think House General and Housing is going to go. And House General and Housing is the committee that deals with housing-related bills. So they're the ones that take testimony, they're the ones that decide if they're gonna move a bill or not, and then if that bill passes out of committee, it goes to the full House of Representatives for vote, then it would go over to the Senate side to do the same thing. All right, current Senate bills. These folks are not as active. We have one of interest. Actually, it might be beneficial to landlords. So this would add an email delivery ability under the definition of actual notice. So this would, if you followed certain procedures, allow you to serve a termination notice by email. So that would be really helpful. It's kind of catching us up to the way people communicate with each other these days. So I'm sure this one will sit on the wall because it would be super helpful for landlords. So I'm sorry, my sarcasm is showing.
Appreciate your authenticity.
All right, what can I do? That little QR code right there on the screen will take you to how do I find my represented official? Either my senator or my representative. So you can look them up by town. So you can find out who you need to contact to talk to about these things. So one thing I would recommend is to reach out to your representative, or sometimes you have more than one, depending on where you live, or your senators. Because you need to start talking to them about the challenges that housing providers are facing, right? You all are facing challenges. Like, why do you increase your rents? What makes you be in a position that you have to increase the rent on a tenant?
Taxes, school budgets.
Right? You know what the sense is down in Montpelier? You guys see an opportunity to make a ton of money off of tenants, and people from out of state are coming and they'll pay 2 or 3 times what you're getting now, so you're jacking up the rents. That's what the sense is down there about what's happening with rents and why rents have increased over the last few years.
That'd be nice if it was true.
Right? But they need to hear from you folks. They
Is
need
there a certain set of them that we should be contacting? Like most of the rentals have to be in Chittenden County.
So it's more powerful if you contact your particular representative or senator where you live, because you are their constituent,
To talk to them.
right?
Hoping for another.
Right, I mean, you could contact any of the folks that are on House General, because those are the ones that are doing, but it's definitely gonna be more powerful if it's your own representative, because you know what happens? You start calling your representative, they're hearing from you about housing bills, they go to those folks on House General, and they were like, what are you guys doing? Why am I getting calls from landlords and housing providers about what you guys are doing over here? So it makes them also go ask the question if they're doing their job. What have your expenses done since 2020? Right? What's the cost? What's the cost of having to replace a furnace right now? Hot water heater, windows, buying lumber. Still,
Labor or.
labor,
Yeah, you can even find labor.
right? So, I mean, these are things they need to hear from you as a community. I mean, I can tell them until I'm blue in the face, but I think sometimes they think I'm making it up. I don't know. But I think it's definitely more powerful, for them to hear it from actual boots on the ground. What do your accounts receivable look like over the last few years? What have you done to help tenants who are struggling with rent? Have you? I'm sure most of you have had those situations and you've worked with them or given them some latitude or helped them apply for programs or, not pull the trigger right away on an eviction, right? You all have those stories. Those are stories to tell. This community held the rental property system together during COVID. Landlords did. I know this. We talked to you guys. We know how hard you worked and we know the effort and the financial hits you took to keep your tenants housed during that time. And you're not getting the acknowledgement that you deserve because of that. But I think sharing these stories with folks will definitely help. Have you experienced damage to your unit? I mean, I'll tell you, I've been an eviction attorney for 20 years. The amount of damage stories I've heard and seen pictures of in the last 2 years is mind blowing. I've never seen anything like it. The level of damage, the amount of damage, the malicious damage. The situation where a tenant on the way out the door, when the sheriff was showing up, went through the unit and broke every single window in the unit. Well, I've never seen anything like that before. Now, the landlord's got to pay to have all those windows repaired. But why are rents going up?
Also like natural disasters, just to point out too, like,
Yes.
for an example, my unit was out for 72 hours with this last windstorm.
Yes.
And costing over $1,000 to like a generator and keep that going.
Yep.
So that way,
Yep.
if pipes didn't freeze, they at least had heat.
Yep.
They didn't have running water, because I couldn't do anything about that.
Right.
but You have to take that into consideration. What are you gonna tell someone?
Right.
Tell her high water, go freeze?
Expenses have gone up. Landlords having to deal with these sort of extreme weather situations, right? This all impacts rents, costs of doing business, decisions. So these are all stories. What I can say is a couple little tidbits when you're talking to folks, keep calm. Be the calm voice of reason, the rational one that, they may say stuff to you that really just fires you up, just zen it. There's any time to be zen, that's it. Because you don't want to be showing that you're getting emotional or that you're getting upset by what they're saying or that, you're unhappy with something, right? You want to be that calm presentation.
To a certain point.
Right.
They're just like, it's like two different worlds.
Right, exactly. But you're there, you want to educate them, not, and this one, I probably shouldn't have to say it, but I will. Don't say derogatory things about tenants. When you're telling your story, tell your story, speak about your experience. Don't be denigrating the other side because that will be an immediate tune out for folks. Yes, you've had struggles, but there's ways to present evidence. I had a tenant that damaged this unit. They went through and did X, Y, versus that deadbeat came through and just punched everything up and he had all these problems and he was a drug dealer and, think about how you're presenting the information and try to, focus it on here's the struggles we're having instead of trying to point the finger at the other side. I mean, we all know who's doing it, but, that will help as well. But definitely scan that code, find out who your representative and your senator is, and those are the people to start talking to. And having these conversations now. As I see bills moving or see that some of them are getting traction, there will be alerts sent out through the Landlords Association email list. That's how I let people know. Here's the bill, here's the information you need to know, here's some things to say, contact your folks. So keep an eye out for those. And if you're not hearing anything from that list, maybe because nothing's happening. Tends to be a flurry of stuff like right at the end sometimes. But and they'll go months with really nothing happening. So when they get distracted with something else.
And we may want to see some of the people from the committee like to join one of our webinars or one of these sessions so that we can facilitate more conversation. Now, the other thing, and this, if anybody knows Ken Libby in this room, please tell him I said this. For the realtors in the room, this is a great reason to donate to RPAC, the Realtor Political Action Committee. I think something like 70–80% of it stays in Vermont. The realtors put, I think, $30,000 towards fighting Just Cause in Burlington. And even though we knew it was going to pass in Burlington, we were successful, I think, by one vote, you know, in veto override of it. So I think it's very important to consider that in addition to the excellent points Angela's making about having the conversations. Side note, if you see me talk with the legislators, I try to use, rather than the tenants, I try to use residents.
Right.
Because it's a simple, tenants sort of, some people will take as not even derogatory, but lesser. Right. Versus residents is, this is what they are, they're our community members.
Right, and I think Jackie, I'll get you guys your hands up. I think there are some lessons for folks in that having those conversations and communications, it does work. It worked in Brattleboro. Brattleboro voted down the Just Cause request down there. Do you know why that happened? Because there's a group of landlords and property managers who were going door to door, they were canvassing, they were setting up tables, they were educating the community about what kind of impact this was going to have on renters and on the community in general. And that resonated. So that message. So don't get discouraged that these conversations don't mean anything and don't have an impact. And Brattleboro is a great example of having those conversations, providing that education, and people making informed decisions about the situation. Jackie, go ahead.
I just wanted to add to the challenges that housing providers have. And it's, I related a story. It had actually had a deep effect on our local legislators who came to talk to us and to listen to us. And it's about how judges can go in and actually override your the content of your lease. I had somebody who moved into the tenant who was on the lease, moved into their apartment. And then when there was a conflict that happened, the tenant who was on the lease was kicked out of the apartment by the judge. And the other person was allowed to stay, not on the lease, not acknowledged at all. So that kind of, and in general, interactions with judges in court make it much more difficult to do anything about it. It discourages people from actually evicting for cause and going for non-cause. You know, it's just the power of the courts over our business. And a date which they don't have over any other business.
And also the precision in which they require you to go through that process, right? There's no other type of case where the level of precision and detail and exactness is required. Yeah.
Back on the Just Cause, where is the status? Was it Essex that passed though on the last legislative round? Does that have to go to legislature? Or?
Right. So Essex voted, Winooski voted, Brattleboro got voted down. Burlington's is still floating around there. So yes, it would need to be introduced at the legislature for approval of that charter change.
That hasn't started.
I haven't seen that start yet. So, and I think taking a step further back, one of the reasons why all of this stuff is so concerning this year is the legislature now has a veto-proof majority, meaning that even if the governor vetoes a bill, it's very likely that the legislature can easily override that veto. So, the legislature likes to complain about the governor and how many bills he's vetoed instead of actually asking the question of why. Why is this the case? Because he's doing a good job looking out for Vermont. And the financial burdens that are being placed on us. So, all right, market trends. I'm going to turn it over to Brian.
Thank you very much. Folks, the information I'm going to share in the next, 5, 10, 15 minutes has been pulled from a combination of the multiple listing service as well as Alan Brooks' report. Now, and with humor, some of it's just my commentary, and I'll start with my commentary. Here's one of the most interesting things that I see is facing, multifamily sellers and buyers. Is, in residential real estate, we consider 5 to 6 months of supply of inventory, meaning no new home comes to market and everything sells in 5 to 6 months, a balanced market. For most of the last few years, we've hovered on the residential side around 1 to 2 months supply of inventory, a seller's market by a mile. Apartment buildings over the last few years, and this is, rough, is about 3 months. Now, in preparing for today, I look both at Chittenden County, which we'll get some information from Alan Brooks on Chittenden County. The state is actually from the multiple listing service. Is in the state, we're hovering about a 5 to 6 month supply of inventory in multifamilies. So in theory, it's more of a balanced market. And Burlington might have been up to 7 and 1 a couple months ago, but 5 to 6. So it's considered balanced. Now, the challenge that I see from, again, if somebody's selling or somebody's buying, is the interest rate environment we've been spoiled over the last 5, 10 years with historically low interest rates. So I don't know about you, but those in the real estate profession started to see people buying apartment buildings at very low cap rates because they were getting a mortgage rate at, for an investment property at 4%, residential is 3.25%, and they could make good money all the same. So right now, the challenge is we're seeing, mortgage rates much higher. Jay, where would you say rates are right now for, ballpark for investor with reasonable credit?
Probably 7, 8.
7, 8. Sorry to catch you with your mouth full. Yeah, and food is here for those who are hungry. So if you're buying a building with a 7% or so interest rate, and you're seeing a 6% cap rate. Remember, cap rate analyzes property based if there is no debt service on the building. To make it cash flow, you're going to need to put down a huge down payment. So I believe if you research the multiple listing service, you're going to see, and Alan Brooks supported this for Burlington, you're going to see cap rates in Burlington of around, give or take, 6%. Alan Brooks actually said it ticked up to 6.5%. Now, pause with Alan Brooks, which is a phenomenal but very costly report. They focus their research on 3 units and up, whereas in MLS, the information is from all. Anybody care to guess why they focused on 3 units and up?
Owner occupied in the duplexes.
Bingo. We're seeing such a shortage of housing that so many people are looking at duplexes both as a way to build some wealth, but also as a way to find housing. I've even had some buyers contemplate turning a duplex into a single family because it's a great area. They don't want to be landlords, but they can't find anything. So I do believe if you research Burlington, you're going to see 6.5% cap rates. Cole, please feel free to correct me. But I think if you look towards St. Albans, you're going to see about 8-9% cap rates on multifamilies. Barry, I believe you're also going to see 8-9%, occasionally a little bit larger. So, everybody when they invest has different goals. Some people are looking for easy. They don't care as much about the return. They're looking for liquidity on sale, liquidity on rent. That's going to shift people more to the Chittenden County market, in some areas. Now, I, believe while there's great value in Chittenden County, personally as an investor, I'm also very interested in mobile home parks as well as, possibly going north of St. Albans, possibly going south to central Vermont, where I'm going to see better cap rates. You'll have some different economic challenges, including liquidity. As well, but I don't think they're big challenges, as well as in some cases, you'll see different quality of resident class depending upon the economics of the area. Now, where I think there's an amazing opportunity, if Angela scared you in any way today and you'd like to sell, we know plenty of people you can talk to. Now, where I think the opportunities are for sellers in this market is, and Cole, Cole and I are business partner in the real estate team, and Jimmy's getting involved in real estate or multifamily as well. I have seen more offers of owner financing in the last 2 years than I have probably seen in the preceding 15 to 20. really interesting. And I was at a VAR session where they actually had a group of, more commercial real estate attorneys, and they echoed the same thing. Anybody care to guess why? Interest rates are going up. So I've seen some sellers say, well, hey, if the bank's offering you a 7, I'm getting 2 on my checking account. I'll do 6.5, beat the bank. And in a side note, if anybody ever looked at an amortization schedule, it is amazing. Just I think like 30% of the interest is paid, in the first like 5 years or something. I mean, it's not, paid throughout. So there is an opportunity for sellers to potentially have exit strategies where they're able to sell and finance the property. Now, first and foremost, this may not be in disclosure. I'm not a financial advisor. I am not an attorney.
But you're good realtors. I listed Keller Williams.
Ryan.
Yeah, Meg.
Yeah, I was just gonna say the other reason, obviously, they want to hold papers because they don't get hit in taxes. And they don't have they don't have anything to buy to flip into 1031. I mean, those are the other 2 obvious reasons why they want to hold paper.
Yeah, and so that note too, if you're thinking of purchasing, I wouldn't, hesitate to ask, have you ever thought, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, about potentially owner financing? Side note, and this is not a class on sales, but I would also encourage you when you do that, possibly send them an amortization schedule so they can just look at how much interest. This is another legal comment, which again, I'm not a legal attorney. I do believe that you're going to find if you were holding paper on a property, it is going to be easier or less difficult to foreclose on an investment property than it is a primary residence. Primary residence can be caught up with bankruptcies, and so forth. So this is not advice to go out and, make loans to people, but it is, an avenue that you should seek, competent legal and tax advice on.
I will say that a foreclosure is way longer than an eviction.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. So, my personal opinion is there's opportunity. There's
I
been
didn't know
never.
what she said. No, neither. No. No,
Uh,
you understand some of what they're saying. Yeah.
All right, thanks, Adam. My apologies. Now, I do think there's obviously opportunity, first and foremost, because we have a lack of housing.
Right.
And so we are seeing as a property management, company, seeing rates, and rentals increase. And we're torn because on one hand, we can appreciate what the legislators are saying. On the flip side, we have obligations to clients.
Yep.
And just in general, there is, a shortage there. Rosie, if you'd be so kind, you think we can shift to the screen share? Okay. So at the end of these slides on the marketing, there's some Allen and Brooks, which again is Chittenden County specific, 3 units up, but these next few slides are all state of Vermont multifamily properties. So it's interesting when we look at supply and demand, and this is, over the last year, the for sale amount of inventory and multiple listing service for multifamilies is down 44.7%. Under contract, oddly enough, is up 14.4%. So this could be people are seeking safer harbor for their investments and believe real estate's a great investment. So despite, there's less, they're buying more into real estate. I've got my hands on a few different things. Real estate is my favorite place to invest because of the strength of it, because of the tax advantages. It's an amazing investment. Now, solds are actually up 27.3% for the year of 2023. I wouldn't be surprised as well if you're actually seeing some people who've moved to the state also looking at investing. I hear this and I don't know this to be true. I heard in Manhattan cap rates are 2-3%. Now, to me, that makes 6 in Burlington phenomenal. But I'm not, investing in New York City. Rosie, if you'd be so kind. Market dynamics, average price per square foot. Everybody, I think, who's investment in real estate probably has different ways that they look at things. I tend to look at things at cap rates, cash on cash analysis. Rarely, if ever, will I use a gross rental multiplier. I do, and this is going to be in a couple slides down the line, occasionally look at the price per bedroom. So the market dynamics, the average price per square foot of a sold property was up 33.5% in 2023, with an average across of last year of $120, which to me seems artificially low. And that probably means that we have some rural pockets in MLS where properties sold for very discounted rate, possibly needing repairs to offset that. Rosie, if you'd be so kind. So median price sold, and this again is the entire state. Median price sold is $267,000. I'm going to guess there's a lot of duplexes behind that. You know, the median price was actually up, and this is over the last 12 months, 28.6%. So still, you know, we're seeing, you know, appreciation, including in, you know, price per square foot and median price across the board as well. Stu, I think we got just a few more. Let's keep going to the next one. Now, what's interesting is month supply under contract and the average days on market. So across the state, we're seeing just under 80 days average for days on market. To me, you know, and I was a grandfather 2 years ago, so I guess it means I'm getting up there, I'm getting old. I didn't want to say it, but I am. To me, a market where you have 70 to 80 days, 90 days of days on market is more of a balanced market. You know, just something I've seen over the last almost 30 years in the industry. Now, what's interesting is you can see from this graph that actually, you know, the month supply of inventory was actually going down from a spike last year, January 23. So to me, that seems relatively healthy. And in this case, they're indicating about a 5-month supply of inventory as of December 23, where you had a huge spike, must have been a large building or something in MLS back in January of 23. Rosie, if you'd be so kind. So this is where it comes from Alan and Brooks information. So a couple things. Side note, as investors, and Angela, I'd be curious if you've heard of anybody really capitalizing on S100. I think one of the best opportunities we have for anybody's looking to invest is S100. Now, candidly, I don't know it super well off the tip of my tongue, but I know that, and Angela may know some of this, but basically any town that has single family zoning, you can now put duplex in a single family zone. There's areas of focus that if they have sewer and municipalities in their target growth zones, and those are the areas that I do not remember off the tip of my tongue, in many cases, you may be able to do a 3 or a 4 unit where you previously couldn't. So any investors that are looking to grow their portfolios, I would dive into S100. I would get to know the towns that are targeted growth zones. And I would look for opportunities to add units, add structures, and that will do 2 things. 1 is create an excellent investment opportunity. 2 is deliver something to our community that we are sorely in need of, more housing units. All right, projected units, and again, this is Chittenden County specific on these next couple of slides. In 2024, their growth of 872 units are projected. Hillside or O'Brien Farms is bringing on a lot of units. I'm sure that's a good part of it. In 2023, 524 new units were built. Vacancy factor, which I would bet is one of the lowest in the nation.
Yeah.
In Chittenden County, as of December 23, 1.6%. To me, a healthy vacancy factor is probably around 3.5, but I say healthy.
I think I actually say closer to 5.
Closer to 5. That gives balances out the market between all the parties. Because remember, capitalism, you want a good balance. One balance or one extreme, the other is not good for the system. The other thing is it would allow people to, there'd be some pressure on landlords to do positive upgrades and improve the units. But we are at least in Chittenden County, 1.6. I would bet across the state, 3.
Between 2 and 3. So even if it's statewide, it's not where it should be.
We got one of the top share. We go through these slides. Rents increased 4.8% in Chittenden County from 22 to 23. Again, cap rates excluding duplexes, they're saying it actually increased, and I think that is a slight softening of the multifamily market, mainly due to interest rates. And with humor, some people get a little scared with some of the great news we shared today. All right, and rock and rolling right down the line. Thank you, oh, you're good, Rosie, keep rock and roll. We're good on that one. Oh, actually, let's go back. Rosie rocks, she puts up with me on a daily basis. Thank you. In Chinna County, this is something I generally take a quick look at. You're looking at, on average, $117,900 per bedroom as of 23 for 3 units and up. Not a bad way to analyze your properties. Approximately $146,400 per unit, and they're coming up, which compares wildly different than the state at $237 per square foot. Rosie, if you'd be so kind. Chinna County's, supply and demand, again, we're, as of this, they have about a 1, they're indicating, not the 1.6 we saw in the previous one, but around 1.25, somewhere right in there for the entire year. So, and it looks like it's going up towards, they say, new supply and vacancy. I think they're forecasting at 2.5. Let's keep rolling on that one. And typical apartment rents by category. Now, as a side note, anybody's looking to help their clients or themselves, I always think HUD is a great place to look to see what Section 8. If you just Google HUD average rents for an area, it gives you a very good benchmark of what you may be able to charge. And again, these are long-term rentals. But a studio, I don't know about you, Angela, I've never seen that so high.
No, it's high.
$1,452 for a studio. I'm thinking of a building that I bought 17 years ago. $600 for a studio. And I bet right now we're not charging 14, but we're charging above 1,000. 1 bedroom, oddly not, much more. And then 2 bedrooms, 1722. But I'm hearing situations, where we're seeing units go well above 2,000 into the mid-2s, depending upon quality construction, location. So if anything, the information I'm seeing here is probably light compared to the market. Very significant compared to the historical nature of, of the data. All right. And we have any more, Rosie? Okay. Interesting that Allen Brooks did this. I liked how they did this. They looked at 3 key things: average price per bedroom, average price per unit, and then average price per, square foot. So right now, if you look back at 2018, average price of the bedroom was $79,800. So give or take 5 years, it's now up to $117,900. Side note, anybody who doesn't own their own resident, I would encourage you to buy a multifamily FHA. Jay's got some great programs. Actually, Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac are doing multifamilies with 5% down now as well, which is excellent. And then average price per unit, again, you saw, not as, wow, it was not as big of a, change, but 147.5 all the way up to 176. I'd have to check. I believe Allen Brooks pulled from the tax registry, but they're saying the number of completed sales, and I believe this was actually specific to Chinna County, was 33, which surprises me on the lower side. A couple other thoughts that come to mind from the market perspective. One is, again, definitely check with your tax advisors. If you're looking at looking at cost segregation, looking at depreciation, 1031s if you're selling. The other thing, and this may circle back to your arena, on the property management side, I joke with clients on the real estate or property management side. If you want to sit down and learn some of the mistakes I made over the last 20 years, I could probably make you a lot of money. Just learn from my mistakes. There's a phrase in Keller Williams, we call it fail forward. I've had plenty of fail forwards. Now, the comment on that is, first and foremost, take a look at your models and systems for screening tenants. She'll probably give you some great ideas to do, not to do. My personal favorite, Vermont Apartment Landlord Association worked with the court portal. We once had a well-spoken gentleman who didn't tell us about the pipe bomb conviction that he had a few years ago. Thanks to the, to the court search. Google, we've had situations where we met some great family members, saw support. Had we Googled them, we would have saw why our tenant had such great support for the family, and it was not for good reasons. So on one hand, my heart breaks as a parent. On the other hand, I want to do my charity. This is Brian speaking. Outside my apartment buildings and outside our clients' apartment buildings. Other things that I would take a quick look at too is, and Angela's talked about this before, is certainly credit bureaus. My personal 2 cents, I don't look at the credit bureaus in the eyes of a mortgage lender, which I used to be. I look at key things about utility charge-offs. You know, those are a big one, because if I'm renting from Angela and I have utility charge off and I'm supposed to turn the utilities in my name, she can move me into her unit. I can't get the utilities turned off, and unless she has a system in place where as she fills the unit, she calls GMP and says, oh, by the way, please turn the power off on Friday. Mr. Brian Armstrong's occupying the unit as of Friday. If she didn't do that, I would bet somewhere in the week, me being in that unit, you couldn't turn off the power.
Right, but it usually is discovered when you get your next bill, so by then
Correct.
it's a month or more down the road.
So thorough processing system, thorough background checks, Google, I'd even look on Facebook and social media. I definitely would join the Apartment Owners Association. Dan Hogan Strongwells also has great suggestions for you. You know, but I would also make sure you have systems, and that might be calendar reminders. Brian moves in on, sign the lease on Monday, he's moving on Friday. Wednesday, you make a call to all the utilities. That's assuming my hypothetical is paying. Any thoughts, questions before I turn it back over to Angela for some really exciting stuff about termination notices? So it's either A, so.
Waiting for the exciting stuff.
No, I know.
There's not questions, you've either nailed something or you bombed. It's one or the other, it's in between.
Exactly.
Good job. Thank you for the info.
And just to piggyback on what Brian was given for resources, Fred, F-R-E-D, has a ton of housing data. It's from the Federal Reserve of Chicago.
Nice.
It's what that guy used when we went to the class at the Realtors building.
Great contribution, thank you, Cole.
All right, so flipping back over to termination notices. This is gonna be a quick rundown because there's probably 3 or 4 hour-long seminars about these issues that you can find out on the YouTube channel. So if you're hearing me talk about something and you're like, I don't know anything about that, maybe go find one of those old seminars and take a listen. So the reason why I keep bringing up termination notices is these are the #1 reason why court cases get dismissed. There's something wrong with your termination notice. The rules are still changing. So the ground is still shifting underneath us. So what you knew 2 years ago, what you knew 3 years ago, even what you knew a year ago about notices may have changed. So please check in with Cindy, check in with somebody at the Landlords Association before you send out notices because it's constantly changing. Here's some of our trouble areas, and we've done deep dives into a lot of these. VAWA forms. This is the Violence Against Women Act forms that need to go with any termination notice that's being sent to a Section 8 tenant. So if you have Section 8 tenants, you're sending termination notices, there's about a 10-page packet that you now have to include with that termination notice every time you send one to the tenant. So if you don't know what that means or don't know where those forms are, let me know. I can get them to you. Failure to copy a housing authority on a termination notice. So this applies for your Section 8 and subsidized tenants as well. So the housing authority needs to receive a copy of that termination notice at the same time you're sending it to the tenant. I hear a lot from landlords, but if I send it to the housing authority, they're going to cut off the subsidy. That might be true, but if you don't send it to the housing authority when you get to court, legal aid's going to file a motion to dismiss saying you didn't send it to the housing authority, and we have a long line of cases that say that's correct. The court's going to dismiss your case for not sending a copy to the housing authority. So make sure you do it. I know it's like darned if you do, darned if you don't.
Will they send you a bill?
Right. Your notice is too short. For the love of all things holy, please add extra time to your termination notices. The only exception to this is if you're hand delivering that notice to the tenant and you know that you're going to get that tenant when you go over on the day that you put on your notice. Please do not make your termination notice exactly 30 days or exactly 60 days or exactly 90 days, because I'll tell you what will happen. You won't catch the tenant. You'll forget to redate it. You'll hand deliver it to them 2 days later, and then your notice is too short. And you'll have to do it again. And if you're sending it in the mail, there is a legal presumption that the tenant gets it 3 days after you sent it. But I can tell you, the postal service is not that reliable anymore.
I think it's $7.50 at USPS delivery confirmation priority.
Yep, and that's a great.
$25 for overnight and you get a tracking number.
Yep. Absolutely. So we're recommending adding 7 to 10, closer to 10 days. And it seems like a lot up front. Like, I want to get this out as fast as possible. You know, it takes even more time. I mean, to do it again because the tenant didn't get enough time. So add extra time, give yourself a buffer. If it's too short, you got to do it again. People generally find out it's too short when they send it to my office to start an eviction, and I start doing the math, and I'm like, your notice isn't good, you have to send it again. So then, you know, they've already lost a bunch of time. Your non-payment notice has amounts in it that are not rent. The only thing that goes in a non-payment of rent notice is rent. Not late fees, not unpaid security deposit, not unpaid utilities, not any other charges that are in your lease, just rent. That's it. And if there's other things in there, you can expect to have a motion filed and your case will get dismissed.
Even if you were to break them out.
Yep, I would get away from that completely. All those other charges can go in their own breach of lease notice. Because that is a violation of the lease. So doesn't mean tenant doesn't owe them, I would just put them in a different notice. Your non-payment of rent notice does not have the right to cure language. I don't see this one as much, but every once in a while, I will see this. That's the language where it says, tenant, you owe us $2,000. If you pay this amount by the termination date, you can stay. It has to be in there. And if it's not, your notice is no good. And your no cause notice is too short. Again, so we have a lot of things here. That you picked the wrong one. We have a very rapidly shifting, do you have a written lease? Do you not have a written lease? Legal scenario happening right now. What I would advise is that if you're not sure, if your 1 year lease that ran out is actually a month to month written lease or not a written lease any longer, err on the side of caution and send the tenant the most amount of notice that they would be entitled to under any scenario, because you have just removed any argument that anyone would have that they got the notice that was too short. And for those of you that own property in Burlington, you know that can turn your no cause notice from a 60-day notice to potentially a 120-day notice. But even worse, to send that 60-day notice and then find out after you file the case that you should or needed to send a 120-day notice. Because you are even further behind at that point. You could have sent them the 120-day notice and just been fine from a timing standpoint. So always err on the side of giving the tenant more notice than maybe is required if you're in one of these gray areas for leases. And we did a whole seminar on this lease issue. And it's still evolving.
And I would challenge anybody to pick Angela's brain on buyouts. I told somebody today, the first time I ever bought a tenant out owed me money. It felt like the moment I realized Santa Claus wasn't real.
Yeah.
You know, you want to vomit when you're doing it, but to me, you know, Angela may have a different opinion. It is, we've done it, you know, a few times in strong property management. It's tough writing a check, but it is a best time value of money in most cases.
It's not for everybody, but from a timing and a just purely business standpoint, it probably makes sense. Yeah.
On a notice, Angela, if it's more of a shorter term lease, like maybe a 2-month lease, where does the line between short term rental and, like, you'd have to give it, if you had a 2-month lease with someone, you still have to give that notice a month before.
Yeah.
That you're not going to renew the lease, right?
Yeah, and unless you're collecting and paying rooms and meals tax to the state of Vermont, you have a rental under Title IX, Chapter 137.
Regular rental, you still have to give that notice, yeah.
Yeah.
Is that an easy definition as to what triggers the taxes to?
If you have if you're operating as primarily a short-term rental, you need to register with the tax department and remit rooms and meals tax for the first 30 days.
What's the definition of shorter term? Is that an open-ended
I mean, some of it depends on how you're structured. If you're running the Airbnb model, you need to be registered, right? If you happen to do like a month or two rental at a time, I think that's probably gonna be considered more longer term. And put you into that other category. Just give it, I mean, don't get me wrong, you probably could register and remit
Oh,
rooms
sure.
and meals for that first 30 days. The state will take your money.
Yeah.
And they're not gonna say no to that. And not on this list, but there's two other things that I see with termination notices. Is one, the termination notice that's not dated. So just make sure you double check it before it goes out, that it actually has a date on it. It's really easy to leave it off or forget it, and it's really important to have that on there. The other thing is to make sure you have the full address of the tenant somewhere in the notice. So not just 123 Main Street, 123 Main Street, Burlington, Vermont.
And apartment and everything.
Apartment number, like the whole address needs to be in that notice, not just the street address. So make sure, again, it's that precision that's required with these. It's not required in any other type of paperwork that you ever have to do. It demands 100% precision on the part of the landlord. Jay, did you have a hand up?
So are these warrants possibly include the other legislation that's out there that have the opportunity for e-signature or e-delivery? With what's in that other bill right now?
If it passed, yes, you could send termination notices via email. There has to be consent and there has to be some sort of red receipt. You have to be able to prove the tenant got it and saw it. And, you know, it's not as complicated as, ding, I just sent an email. So there's a few things you have to do for protection of sort of both parties. But yeah, I would allow these types of notices to go via email if that passed. Yeah, which would be helpful.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, so that's the end of my stuff, and I think we are at time. Unless there's any last questions, either on the screen or in the room here.
Any questions come about? See, the Essex is starting to turn into a rental registry. Pros, any talking points on pros and cons of the hearing? If so, choose to go.
I know, the rental registry stuff is getting harder and harder, with a lot of the data that we actually have out of Burlington. It's proven to be pretty helpful to landlords, and I know it doesn't feel like that, but the code enforcement office, in terms of being out, having inspections, knowing that you have somebody to call that's a professional, but also having those baseline check-ins where you know somebody's been in your unit. So if the tenant starts complaining about something, you have this history of, you know, your unit being inspected and knowing that, no, it's not actually a problem. It has been beneficial to the landlord community there. You know, again, it just depends on what it's being used for. That's always the problem with these registries. And who has access to the information.
My personal 2 cents is, I think it makes sense to have them because we've had tenants where we knew we were gonna have challenge, they possibly would complain. So we preemptively brought in inspectors to make sure the building was up to code so that it would somewhat defang some of their efforts. The other thing is on the realtor side is, you know, one of the benefits that see the rental registry is potentially getting more clarity on fire safety. You know, I'm honored to work with 180 or so independent agent or contractors across the state. And it's really challenging when you tell a seller, well, in Burlington, I don't care if it's in the contract or not, if you don't have a fire safety market, you know, inspections, it's gonna be really hard for attorneys to offer clean title. Yet, I'm still hearing in Southern Vermont, they don't do a lot of the fire safety inspections. Why are you asking for one, Brian? We don't do that here. Yet it's the same law. And then many of us had consumers call up the fire, you know, when there's not a memorandum of understanding between the municipality and the fire safety of the state of Vermont. The fire marshal said, hey, you don't need this. I don't know why the realtors are telling everybody this. So as a listing agent, I don't want to necessarily ask a seller to do an inspection that they may not have to do in that area. On the flip side, it's good for their protection of liability. And as a buyer's agent, I want to make sure that the building's up to stuff, you know, to protect my client. So with humor, all this confusion, all this change is going to create opportunities for those who want to get a little bit more purposeful, systematized, and stay involved. And I encourage Angela, thank you for your suggestions. Reach out to those people. Side note, guys, if you think of a topic that Angela and I can bring, it brings you a lot of value, please let us know, because we'd love to keep doing that. And I think one of them might be a great opportunity to have some people from that committee join us. Now, if we do that, please remember what Angela said. We'll do some Zen breathing beforehand, we'll have a little yoga session beforehand. Any other thoughts or questions before we thank everybody for the
That's
time?
my idea, though. We could try to get them in a room.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Helpful for them to hear from folks.
Yeah. Angela,
You
can't stress
can-
enough.
You can see them at the legislative sessions that they have too.
The
Great point, Meg.
meet and greets and breakfasts that they have around. Yep.
Folks, can't stress enough. Thank you for being here. Angela, thank you for all you do in the Vermont Apartment Owners and Landlords Association. On behalf of Stronghold Real Estate, Stronghold Property Management, Keller Williams, Vermont, thank you for joining us today. We've got some great food in the background. And Rosie, thank you for all your help getting this done today.
And thanks to
Thank you, folks.
the